In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. These words were famously read by the Apollo 8 astronauts in what was the most watched TV broadcast of its time on Christmas Eve 1968 as the Apollo crew orbited the moon. This was the first time humans had ever visited another celestial body. These are indeed some of the most recognizable verses in all of Scripture. The text tells the story of God as the ultimate creator of all things, the heavens and the earth, setting in motion and dwelling within all of the created universe. Intimately aware of every plant and animal, every mineral, from the depths of the sea to the highest mountaintop. God's handiwork can be seen in the beauty of blooming plants, the complexities of whale song, and in the eyes of one another. Every single creature that is living or has ever walked or crawled on the face of the earth, every molecule, every atom, every subatomic particle. Such things are radically beyond our comprehension because when we start to try and understand the mystery and the intricate details of this planet, our brains simply cannot handle the complexity. And for me at least, that's okay. I'm comfortable with accepting that I could never possibly understand the mind of God. Some scientists spend their entire professional careers just seeking to understand an individual process in just one system of a single organism. The earth is far too large and complex to understand it fully. For some, accepting the unknown can be intimidating or paralyzing. For others, yielding to the mystery is liberating. This is all, of course, further complicated by the reality that when we talk about understanding things, we are largely talking about making sense of things that exist here and now, located in our own specific temporal and spatial realities. Now, part of the reason that we chose to explore this admittedly unique sermon series is because science fiction and out-of-this-world thinking can help to create space for asking and considering unique questions. Last week in Sunday school, Bethany Theological Seminary professor, an admitted sci-fi enthusiast, defined science fiction as presenting an alternative reality to the present that calls into question the present situation and proposes an alternative in its place, typically by spatial or temporal displacement. Doing this within the context as a faith community creates opportunities for us to explore a variety of ethical and theological questions. And so this morning, in our last week of our Out of This World series, we will continue that exploration into outer space as we consider the existence of alien life forms. Now, honestly, I want to just pause for a second and acknowledge that that is never a phrase that I would have expected to use from the pulpit, but here we are. And the truth is, I think it's really a fascinating question, not only because if we're all honest with ourselves, it is almost certainly something that has likely crossed your mind before, but it is such a big existential question that contemplates the origin and uniqueness of life, as well as our relationship with God. If you're like me, you have spent not an insignificant amount of time gazing into the night sky. When I was younger, and I guess if I'm honest, still to this day, it's fascinating for me to lay on my back on the ground and not think of myself on top of the world looking up, but envisioning myself as if strapped to the side of the globe, looking out into space. How mesmerizing and escapist it is to stare into space on a clear night, to let our thoughts drift out heavenward, contemplating just how big and far away things are, and how small it sometimes makes us feel. Staring out into the night sky can paradoxically make us feel both unmoored and deeply centered at the same time. Looking into a very dark and clear night sky can be a deeply spiritual experience, something our ancestors were treated to with much greater regularity before increased light pollution of our day. The sky is often half of our visual landscape, always there, stretching out into eternity, leaving us with the question, what else is out there? Are we alone? So before we get into a sermon with an unusual amount of scientific details about the formation and statistical likelihood of extraterrestrial life, it may be helpful for us to briefly consider the challenge we face when thinking about vast and large things. For the most part, our brains are not wired to comprehend and rationalize large numbers and sizes of the magnitude that we'll be talking about today. From an evolutionary standpoint, it's somewhat unnecessary. But also, with the term billions being thrown around in the news all of the time, we may have become desensitized to just how large of a number that really is. So for context, imagine starting out as a young person, your first job, and you're told that your job will be for 8 hours a day to count $1 bills every second. Now, it sounds boring, but the good news is you get to keep them at the end of the day. So after just 1 minute, you have $60. After an hour's work, you're making $3,600 an hour. Not bad, right? And that would be wonderful. Imagine this continued every second for every day. You'd show up. Really a terrible way to spend your existence, but you'd be making a lot of money. But my point is, imagine the time that you've spent in your life, if that's what you did every single day of your working life. After just 34 days, you would be a millionaire. And that's great. It happens quickly. But what I think is hard for us to recognize is that to get to $1 billion, you would need to work almost 100 years. So again, imagine if your occupation was doing this day in and day out. Every second of your working life, you were making $1 a second. You wouldn't have $1 billion. And $1 trillion, well, that's even crazier for us to think about. You could start this job before the pyramids had built, never taking a vacation, never taking a weekend off, doing this every day of your life for 8 hours a day. And even if you started before the pyramids were built, and you were counting $10 bills instead of $1 bills, you still wouldn't have $1 trillion. These numbers are so big, we can't even comprehend them. So this morning, when you hear numbers like 1 billion or 1 trillion, just take a moment to try and consider the absolute gigantic magnitude and scale of which we are talking about. We can begin this conversation about life on other planets by conceding that currently it is all but impossible to rule out the potential for alien life to exist. Now, it's certainly reasonable for one to believe that the Earth is the only place in the universe with life, but it's likely impossible to ever definitively prove that. So we are likely to remain in a state of either discovering life exists or never really being able to say for sure. I also want to acknowledge up front that I am operating from a position that accepts empirical evidence and general consensus of scientific theories about the age and the formation of the universe, its stars and planets. While I hold deeply to the belief that God is the ultimate creator of the universe, I don't ascribe to a belief in young earth creationism, which interprets the creation story in Genesis as a literal historical and scientific account. I've come to have faith and trust in a reality that if it is true, it is of God. And better understanding the world around us need not damage our relationship to the divine. Indeed, greater understanding ought to only enhance and strengthen that relationship. Now, The most popular formula for calculating the number of civilizations with which humans could communicate in the Milky Way galaxy is known as the Drake equation. It's a formula that allows for a numeric value to exist for a number of specific probabilities. The rate in which stars are created, the percentage of stars that have planets, the mean number of planets that could possibly support life per star, the fraction of life supporting planets that develop life, the fraction of planets with life where that life ultimately develops into civilization, and a fraction of civilizations that develop detectable forms of communication. And finally, the length of time for which such communications exist. People pile in all sorts of different numbers into this equation and come up with all sorts of different answers. The inputs for this formula can vary widely, causing the outputs to do the same. Estimates in this equation have varied from us being alone in this galaxy and perhaps the observable universe to there being over 15 million planets with detectable intelligent life within our own galaxy. And so here's the caveat. This equation is only for our galaxy. The Milky Way. Now, of course, this is not actually an image of what our galaxy looks like. We are deep within inside it, and we've never even come close to getting far enough to get a picture like this. But scientists believe that this is what it looks like. It's a spiral galaxy, technically a barred spiral galaxy. And it's similar to this. This is Andromeda. Andromeda is the closest large galaxy to Earth and estimated to be similar in shape and size. It too is a spiral galaxy. Like Andromeda, our own Milky Way galaxy is believed to contain between hundreds of billions to 1 trillion stars. Each of these galaxies is about 100,000 light years away, perhaps Andromeda is slightly larger. 100,000 light years. On a clear night, looking into the night sky, if you're fortunate enough to have a clear enough sky, you can see this hazy band of light in a specific direction. That part of the sky is more clouded with starlight as we look sideways through our own galaxy, compared to when we look straight up out of the galaxy through a less dense star field. Now, it's also worth noting that every star in the night sky that we see is just one of our immediate neighboring stars. But a reminder that the closest star to our planet is our own sun. Some 93 million miles away, you could spend over 100 years, every moment of your lifetime, no sleeping, traveling in a car going 100 miles per hour, and never make it. The sun is what gives energy to our planet. We would not be here today without our sun. The next closest star is over 4 light years away, 5.8 trillion miles, which means it would take 32,000 years to get there if you were on the space shuttle, traveling at 5 miles per second. And just like we have a neighborhood of local stars that make up our part of the galaxy, we have a local group of galaxies that make up our region of the universe, very creatively called the local group. And here you can see some of them. This cluster of galactic neighbors are the only ones that we will actually have a future with. All other galaxies that we can observe in the universe are drifting further away due to an expanding universe. But just how many other galaxies are there? Well, to be fair, it's hard to really know for sure because space is just so large. But back in 1995, some scientists decided to point Hubble, which is the famous Hubble telescope, into this very dark section of the night sky. The scientists thought they would leave it there and figure out what lied in that dark space. And this area is a very small area of the sky. If you hold a ballpoint pen about an arm's length in front of you, the very tip of the pen, what it covers, that's the area that this telescope was pointed at. And this is the image that came back. Hubble Deep Field. We've since done a number of other deep field pictures, but this was the first one. This is where things started to get mind-blowing. Thousands of distant galaxies, all within that tiny dot in the night sky. Every one of these colorful pieces of light that you see here is an entire galaxy. Scientists estimate that there are hundreds of billions of galaxies in the universe. And with each of those galaxies likely containing hundreds of billions of stars, and each of those stars likely containing planets, and some of those stars, those planets being in places that could support life, the number of potential candidates is huge. Unimaginable, perhaps. You may have heard it said that there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches. And that's true, but it's much, much larger than that. It's actually true that based on the estimates that are made from images like this, that there could be multiple Earth-like planets for every single grain of sand on the beaches of Earth. Think about that the next time that you're at the beach, running your fingers through the sand. But being Earth-like is not the same as actually having life. Now, which, as far as we can tell, does not exist anywhere in the universe. Which brings us to the Fermi Paradox. Given the incredible, huge numbers of potential planets that could have life, and the amount of time that a civilization could develop, why have we not had any communication with extraterrestrials? This brings up very big existential questions. Just how unique and alone are we? Our star and planetary system are not especially old compared to others. It's reasonable to believe that if other civilizations exist, they could be much older and much more advanced than our own. It's difficult to even imagine the kind of technology that could be developed over such a long period of time. We are possibly a relatively young civilization. Think about all that has changed in just the past 100 years, even the technology of the past 10 years. And now consider fast forwarding into the future. What could the next 50 years hold? 100 years? 1,000? 1,000,000 years? It's unfathomable. One hypothesis has shown that if an advanced civilization developed some kind of machine that could land on a habitable planet and then replicate itself in 500 years and go to 2 other planets, then the whole galaxy would be colonized in less than 4 million years. And that's a relative blink of the eye when you consider that dinosaurs have been extinct for 65 million years. But obviously, this hasn't happened. Why? Well, there's a number of reasons for this, but one of the ideas is this great filter theory. A theory that suggests that somewhere along the course of life existing up to a point of being able to communicate, there are very significant or limiting barriers or hurdles for life that prevent advancing to such a point. Perhaps the great filter is still ahead of us. Maybe life is abundant in the universe, but rarely gets farther than about where we are now, either through our own doing or a statistical likelihood of some kind of cataclysmic event. Maybe when life gets advanced enough, it inevitably just destroys itself through habitat destruction, violence, or any number of advanced technologies that may still be in Pandora's box. This isn't unimaginable for me to consider. Or maybe meteors or cosmic ray bursts or solar flares happen quite regularly, and we have just been in a relatively calm period without planetary cataclysm. The other possibility is that the great filter is already behind us, that the development of life itself, or multicellular organisms, or the evolution of intelligence are extremely rare leaps to make. Maybe we are just the first, and we will soon hear from others in the future. Or maybe we truly are the only form of life in the universe. Are we the singular example of God's divine spark of creation? It's very possible. There are a few other theories in response to the Fermi Paradox about why we have not encountered alien life. The timing could be off. Civilizations are numerous but short-lived, and we just miss each other in cosmic windows of our existence. We are not interesting enough. There's so much life out there that we do not rise to being special enough for aliens to care about, and we're just ignored. We could exist in a particularly empty or backwater place in the galaxy, too far for space travel for other thriving civilizations that may exist. Perhaps we don't yet possess the technology to communicate or are not advanced enough to bother with. Perhaps someday in the future that could happen. Maybe we are intentionally being left alone while being observed at a distance. Perhaps a super predator civilization exists that destroys all civilizations as they advance, wiping them out so that they never are able to communicate. Maybe we have been contacted, and our government or lizard people are keeping it all secret. I don't doubt that one, but it's possible. I don't think it's true. There could be any number of reasons why so far we have no evidence of other life existing in the universe. But ultimately, the real question for us is when we consider all of these things, what do they say to us? Here and now about our existence and our relationship to God. Personally, I would like to believe that if we discovered that there was life elsewhere in the universe, it would not cause me to question my faith or trust in God, but instead merely expand my understanding and appreciation for God's creation. So how does this all sit with you? How does it make you feel? Does the mystery of it all cause you to be in awe about the magnitude and the size and the scope of the created universe? Or is there some kind of existential dread of feeling small, insignificant, alone? Do you secretly hope for there to be other life out there, wishing for such an encounter to happen in your lifetime? Or do you desire for us to be the only form of life created by God, unique, loved as God's only beloved? What does it mean to know that we have been created in God's image? Is it in our physical appearance as earthlings? If other rational and intelligent life exists, how is it that we could expect them to contemplate their relationship to God? Would we be called to evangelize to them? Would they have a longer and deeper relationship with God and able to offer divine revelation to us? How is it exactly that God would have been revealed to them? Would the human body of Jesus be familiar or have relevance to an alien species if they looked nothing like humans? Would their salvation come in the form of divine incarnation that would take their bodily form, perhaps with tentacles or gills? Again, such questions I never would have expected to be asking in a sermon. But fascinating questions, especially when we consider and respect the scale of God's created universe. In spite of this mystery and questions, or perhaps because of it, we can hold on deeply to the truth that God's love and creative power will never be surpassed. And even in an immeasurable universe, we matter to God. From Ephesians. For this reason I kneel before the Father, for whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray out of his glorious riches he might strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people. to grasp how wide and how long and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of the fullness of God. And verse 20, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus through all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Our lived reality is that even without life elsewhere, we live in a beautifully wild and complex world. We remain called to be filled with awe and wonder about creation. Wrestling with such odd and complicated questions offers texture and depth to our relationship with creation and Creator. We can never presume to know all the answers of the cosmos, but to dwell in the questions and the mystery can be a holy thing. To think deeply in reverence about creation can sometimes be a luxury, but when you find yourself with an opportunity to stare at a beautiful sunset, a scenic overlook, or the night sky, breathe it in deeply. As we conclude this odd sermon series about science fiction, may we be left with curiosity and deep appreciation. Importantly, with thankfulness for the real world we do have before us. If science fiction invites us to consider alternative times and places, it does so with the intention of holding up such stories like a mirror to our current reality. Considering the vast size and deep time of the universe can help us to all appreciate how fragile and special our lives are in this very moment. They truly are. To exist at all is a miracle. Living at this time and in this place is a gift. We are here now, within a fascinating and perhaps brief window of existence on this planet. May we embrace it with thanksgiving and with love for one another, doing the best that we can with the time that we have to build a future and a present reality that is filled with awe and gratitude, so as to be pleasing to God. Such things do not change with the presence of other life in the universe, whether we know it exists or not.